If you've been putting in the work and your ideas are grounded in preparation, then don't overthink it. In this portion of our conversation, Tia challenges us to work against the mantra of what's the worst that can happen. You're going to want to stay tuned so you can hear her lay out the gospel truths of marketing. Okay, so I want to dig a little bit into you had mentioned in your LinkedIn profile that you have a Seth Godin alt
Mhm.
MBA. Okay, so Seth Godin is obviously like one of the great marketing thinkers and writers. And so, can you tell us a little bit of like your takeaways from that and what that even means? Especially because I mean, this class is an MBA class. So, what's an alt MBA? And what are some of the things that they need to know from Seth Godin?
Oh gosh, that's a whole other podcast. No. Um,
I know he had the whole
where do I
series.
start? Yeah, where do I start? I'm going to start with a story. Seth Godin came into my life. I was at Hewlett Packard at that time. I was manager. I had transferred over from another industry, and I read his book Lynchpin, and it forever changed. Honestly, it changed my life. It changed my outlook. And the key underlying theme of Lynchpin, if you haven't read it, go read it. It will. There's just so much goodness in there, which is if not now, when? Like, and I'm trying to think of all of the good nuggets in there, but it's basically like you be a linchpin. Part of it is what I was just talking about, right? Ask the good questions, ask your curious questions. Sometimes ask for forgiveness later, just ship it. Like he has all these different mantras in there of like just do it. Like don't overthink it. Show up as your best self. Be the one that's sometimes he calls it the squeaky cog in the wheel, right? Like that's okay. Like do it. Like bring your creativity and your thoughts. So that linchpin book made me realize, and my team to this, I mean, last week they said another example of, because I always say, like, if you don't ask, you'll never know. And as a nonprofit, I'm constantly asking for discounts. What can you do for us? And in previous lives, I just asked. So the story I will tell you is in that role after I read Lynchpin, I was put in charge of doing our global retail. Like we brought all of our retail executives into this really nice place and showed them all of the upcoming technology across HP for the consumer side. And we needed a keynote speaker, and I'm like, Seth Godin. And I didn't ask anyone's permission. I was in charge of this thing. I'm like, what, 30 years old? I can't remember. And I literally emailed Seth Godin from his blog, and he emailed me back in an hour. And we were on the
Wow.
phone the next day.
Wow.
And whatever I put, like, and again, I didn't overthink it. I was like, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is why I think you'd be a good fit for this. And he ended up not having he couldn't fit it into his schedule. And then he recommended someone, right? And that's the person we hired. But I was talking to Seth Godin. I remember like emailed him. I do that to this day. If there are people on LinkedIn that I've connected with and then subsequently met that I literally just, oh, that looks like an interesting business. I reach out to them, tell them who I am, why I think it's important that we connect.
Yep.
And I'm shocked at the amount of people that answer the call.
Yep.
Shocked.
I had a very similar experience. So Rita McGrath is a super well-known New York Times bestselling author. She teaches, she's a professor at Columbia, and I wanted to put together a panel discussion, and I was like, well, I need Rita, obviously.
Love
So
it.
I did exactly that. I emailed Rita,
Yeah.
and her assistant emailed back and was like, oh, well, what's the what are you willing to pay as your stipend? And I'm like, nothing. Like, I don't have anything. I was like, but maybe she'd still be interested. And sure enough, Rita wound up being, Dr. McGrath wound up being on my panel. Um, just because I sent the email and asked. And it's one of those things, just like, yeah, just don't think about it. I don't know how many times I've sent emails. And then like, as I've like hit send, then I'm like,
I
what did I
just did that.
do?
Exactly. I just did that. Exactly. And that's
And
what
then
I
you're like,
think.
the worst that can, she didn't know me beforehand. The worst that can happen is she never
She
replies.
said
It's okay.
no. I love
Yeah.
that mantra too. What's the worst that can happen? She says no.
Right.
Oh well, right?
Right. Exactly.
So that's so set imprint is more from that linchpin, and that applies to market. That applies to anything you do, which is probably why I gravitated so much to that. And then when I think about so the alt MBA, I was in between, I thought I was going to be in between jobs and then ended up getting recruited to this position. So I was like, yeah, I'll do this alt MBA thing. So what is alt MBA? And if you follow Seth's blog, and if you look back in time, I'm not sure if he talks about it as much anymore, but he was really disheartened with the education system, university, high school, all of it. He's like, it's a old system for the industrial way of doing things, and it's not adapting. And I know, Amy, you've got great opinions and the fact that you're doing this and what you're doing for your students. There's very much alignment in what Seth is talking about, because what the alt MBA was and is about bringing peers together and learning in a peer set. It was intense. We had assignments every week. We had to publish things. We had prompts, and it was almost like peer-to-peer teaching, but guided by, a curriculum, for lack of a better term. But it was much, I mean, I have never thought so deeply, and we had prompts, and it was a lot of writing to get stuff out, and then to then shape it, and then and it was all around different business models and marketing campaigns. Many people that graduate from that intense, I think it's 8-week program. I can't remember now, 12 maybe, but I mean, like, intense weekends. We were on Zoom, and it was all so I was talking to people in Australia it was all virtual. And that was before COVID. So it was virtual before COVID. So again, Seth tends to lean into technologies before they're really like mainstream.
Right.
And the power of that was, again, I go back to my culture building, right? When you think about transparency, accountability, and clarity, when I think about that ability we had to hold each other accountable. Like, if one person didn't show up, we had group projects and we had individual projects. And so it was just a phenomenal, it was so intense, and that accountability was there, even though we were all virtual. It was kind of crazy, but it unlocked creativity, and a lot of it was prompt, write about this. This is the situation. Oh, and it ended with, he has another book called, or a workbook, it's called Just Ship It. And so what these cycles did to us is there was no perfection. You got to get it out. If it's 80%, it's 80%. And you learned very quickly that your 80% is actually pretty damn good.
Right.
And so it kind of forced you to be in this cycle of constant creation and constant just shipping it out, getting feedback. So that's another Seth Godin. That's what the alt MBA was. And I had so that was alt MBA.
That's great. I really like that. I've had some feedback from some students who have graduated, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like, I cannot believe how much faster I work now, and I have to work." Because, like, things that there's no way, if you had given me that kind of deadline, I would have thought that I could have produced it whenever I was in school or in the program. But that's just what kind of industry calls for. Like you said, just getting it out. And perfection can be such a roadblock. Thinking that it absolutely has to be perfect can really slow you down, and then create so much fear, and it makes it so much bigger than maybe what it is, that you let the fear of it not being perfect prevent you from even doing anything, right? And so I like that mindset.
Yeah, I love that fear. Seth talks a lot about fear and what it does to not getting things out. It's actually, you hide behind it, right? And so the fear
Right,
of reaching
absolutely.
out to Seth Godin, the fear of reaching out, to anyone, the fear of giving feedback. And often 99.9% of the time, that fear is unfounded, completely unfounded. And it's what you come out of that confrontation, or you come out of that class that makes you turn those things and you go, wow, wasn't that bad. And it was a lot, oh, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Right.
Right. Yeah. Love those moments. Okay. So you've talked about so many cool things, and you've just kind of sprinkled here and there, oh, Pepsi, or oh, HP, or, oh, Revlon, or oh, Cryobank, or, I haven't said that one yet, but it's in there.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us about, um, you've done so many cool things across so many cool industries. What are the marketing gospel truths? where
Mm.
it doesn't matter the time period, it doesn't matter the technology, it doesn't matter the industry. These are the marketing truths that you really need to understand if you're going to be operating in any marketing space.
Three come to mind. I'll go back to the customer first. It's not changed since the day I went to school from the time now, like customer first. If you don't understand your customer, and even again, don't let the fear of making it perfect and you need quality or quantitative data, just understand the customer in some respect. So that's one truth that still exists. Um, the second is, this is going to be an interesting one. Um, driving engagement has always been the name of the game. Now, it's changed from, direct mail
Right.
to, well, there's all the channels now that we can drive engagement. But what I find around that engagement piece is you've got to have, again, I guess it is back to the customer, but you yourself have to have the connection, the heart, right? So we can all read stuff that doesn't quite get it, right? Or it's not driving engagement needs heart. We used to call it content is king. Like there's been so many different things, and I don't want to call it content because it's different than what I'm saying. It's really like driving engagement is about creating content that connects. Maybe that's how I'll say it. So driving
Okay.
engagement, that has been true and still is true. I think the last one that I'll mention as a marketing truth is uh this change, be ready. Oh, and I have one more. I have one more that just made me think of something. Change, be ready. It's changing rapidly, right? So the example I'll give is 5 years ago, direct mail was dead. I can tell you in the nonprofit space, direct mail is not dead. And in fact, gets higher engagement and ROI for us than any of our paid media channels. Now, that might be specific to donations, but 5 years ago, we shelved it. 5 years later, we're like, oh, this belongs in the mix. So constant, which leads me to my last, data, data, data. And it's not just data, but it's data turning into insights that turn into action. That's important, right?
Yeah.
Data, insights that leads to action. And there's no marketer out there that cannot be a good data scientist, I guess is the way I'd put it.
Yeah. And so what are some of the things? So, like in this class, the students are responsible for earning their Google Analytics certification. Obviously, that's just one piece of, a digital marketing. You had mentioned already, 300,000 unique, engagers. And so looking at bounce rate and, how many conversions or whatever that conversion activity is that you have set up on your digital assets. But what else? What other kind of data are you looking for specifically? And how do you go setting up? Because data hygiene and data collection are really big issues. And how do you go about addressing collecting the right data and then making sure that that data is clean?
Ooh, that's the holy grail right there. We're working on it at Caringbridge right now. We have a data architect coming in, so that's a bigger. How do you go about ensuring it? Oh gosh, here's what I would recommend outside of getting a good data structure, which is somewhat reliant on other parts of the organization. However, whatever data you have, the way to test the quality and that's driving the insight and the decision you're making, trend it. Just went through this with my team. There's been a fact spit out. We were all rallied around it. Shame on us for not looking at the detail. I finally went, you know what? I want to see, can you trend that last 5 years and then by quarter? And all of a sudden, the story we'd been telling was not true. And so the data that story was built on was still there. I'm going to put in air quotes, true. But when you cut it in different ways and trend, I think trend is the key here because that starts to show you patterns that then
Right.
starts to show you the quality or the areas that you need to be looking at. It's kind of the forest through the trees approach. So trend, I will phrase it as trending is
Yeah.
important.
Okay. And can you explain that a little bit more for
Mm,
somebody who may not, if you say trend your data, they may not know what that means. Can you
yeah.
be a little bit more granular about that?
Absolutely. So I'll go back to like this resource that we're talking about had every week, every day data. We then took that and summarized it, summed all of those parts into years. So we started with years. So start with the largest way you could look at it. So it could be year, it could be I'm thinking in calendar terms, right? So that's one way to trend. Another might be day part. So when are people coming into your store? How many, like trended by morning, afternoon, night, might be a time of day. Another classification for trending, right? So you're looking at, okay, is morning different than afternoon, than different than evening, as an example. So it's trending is groupings of ways that people are interacting with your product or your retail offering. Does that maybe
Yep.
a little more clear?
Yep. Yep. Perfect. Way to hit that clarity.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's awesome. So can you talk about the differences then? Because I mean, you've, very, very high level marketing strategy and execution for, industry, corporate, and then now switching from that to nonprofit. Can you talk about the differences between, corporate marketing and nonprofit marketing and what's the same?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the same because I'm really passionate about it. I think there'll be a white paper potentially in the future about this. And the passion I have is that there should be no difference between the two approaches. At the end of the day, I'll simplify it even more. Nonprofit and for-profit is a tax status. Nonprofit takes all of the funds they have and they reinvest it down to the zero back into the thing that we do, the product, so to speak, and for profit keeps some of that and either, reinvest some and keep some as a valuation mechanism for how much they're worth. So, so that's just I've gotten a lot of flack depending on the audience, and sometimes people like stand up and cheer when I say that it's tax status, but that's the truth. It's a tax status.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Really? There are some people who don't see it that way.
I think the people that are like really in the nonprofit, they just look at mission and the differences there. But so what's different? I will tell you nothing. And let me explain that. In the for-profit world marketing, we were looking at, funnel. Do we have who's an engaged? Are they now qualified, marketing qualified, sales qualified? How are we converting them through that funnel? What are the channels that we're marketing to so that we get the right message to none of that is different in nonprofit. The messaging might be different, but at the end of the day, not really. Because if you think about it, what inspires people to buy, what inspires people to give is the emotional connection wrapped in the product that they need. It's the same thing. So
Yeah.
I find myself, the other piece around, and this is more business related, but fundraising. So in my for-profit, I was out fundraising in startups and private equity for funds that, would be invested in our company. Now I'm just out having the same kind of conversations, but about donating people's money to it's the same thing if you think about it, the same storytelling, the same pipeline, or the same approach. So the one thing that I would say is different, and I don't like this, I will claim it, is the culture. Here's what I mean by that. For profit is intense. It's uh, sense of urgency is high. Analytics are table stakes. Like there's a lot in there that you are constantly looking at data, interpreting it to drive your decisions. And I will qualify this. This is my one and only nonprofit experience, but I also interact with other nonprofit leaders. Oftentimes that sense of urgency, that looking at analytics is less, and it's
Yeah.
less intense, and people feel really good because, so here's my experience, people feel really good because we have a great mission, and they don't know what they did that day, why what they did that day was important to drive that mission.
Got
That
it.
is so critical. Like you have to, in any organization, you need to understand what you prioritize that day at any level, why it mattered to the thing we need, the goals, and the really the people at the other end.
Yeah.
And so it's easy at a nonprofit, I think, to feel really good about what you're doing, but maybe not necessarily prioritize what you're doing. to meet
Yeah,
that goal.
I love that. So one of my favorite books is by Alan Dibbs, and it's the one-page marketing plan. And he says one of his one-liners in it that was just like, whew, really hit me. Was it's really easy to fake yourself out being busy.
Love that.
Yeah,
100%.
and it's like, but what are you doing, and how is the things that you are busy with, how are they actually contributing, to revenue or to furthering the mission? And so, the other one that he says that is really good that I could also maybe see, obviously, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is like you can't use marketing to overcome bad math.
Love that. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And so I feel like there probably is just more of a hyper focus on some of those sorts of things in the corporate world than maybe in the nonprofit. So, well, that's cool. I look forward to that white paper because that yeah, that seems like it would be really interesting. Do you know? And this is just I'm just curious if there are many CEOs of nonprofits like you that have transferred from corporate world, or do they kind of grow up through the nonprofit verticals?
Yeah, I want more to try. I think we should both go back and forth, my opinion. In general, I'm going to break it down. Industry-wise, healthcare industry, you've got a lot of people that come from for-profit into nonprofit because the healthcare industry, and I'm talking like hospital systems. I mean, those are huge jobs, billion-dollar revenue
Right.
structures.
But they're
So
technically a nonprofit. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So that's different. I think in the what I'd call the traditional nonprofit sector, you mostly see people coming through that from
Yeah.
bottom to top. And I've met a handful that have, made, in fact, I get a lot of calls on like, hey, what do you think about the pivot? And so there's a lot of things we talk about in that pivot. And I'm like, do it. We need more people that bring that rigor of that analytics piece into the for-profit sector.
Well, there you have it, folks. The gospel of marketing, according to Tia. How much more could you accomplish if you weren't letting fear hold you back? I hope you will take her insight and use it to do what you've really been wanting to do. Stay tuned for the final portion of our conversation when we both share what our spirit animals are and discuss the importance of understanding your personality.